I still remember the exact moment I clicked confirm on the plane tickets, a lump in my throat and excitement buzzing through my chest. $15,500. That was the total, every penny I had painstakingly saved over months, sometimes years, just to give my parents the vacation of a lifetime. My name is Jordan, and I had convinced myself that this was more than a trip. It was a chance to show them how much I appreciated all the sacrifices they had made for me growing up. Every late-night study session they encouraged me through, every meal they somehow scraped together, every time they held me up when life felt heavy, I wanted to give back. I had gone over every detail countless times: flight numbers, departure times, luggage limits, hotel reservations. I imagined the moment they'd step off the plane, their eyes lighting up at seeing the snow-capped mountains, the crisp air of Lake Tahoe filling their lungs. I pictured us laughing over breakfast, exploring trails together, reminiscing about family stories that had become legends in our household. I told myself this wasn't about the money, it was about love. But $15,500 isn't just a number, it's hours of work, skipped nights out, small luxuries I had denied myself to make this happen. The day of their departure, I was buzzing with anticipation. I packed their bags, double-checked the boarding passes, and even slipped a few surprise treats into their luggage, a reminder that I cared, that I had thought of every little detail. I pictured us standing together at the gate, maybe even taking a photo as the plane taxied down the runway, and then spending the week making memories I had dreamed about for so long. In my mind, it was perfect, a reward for all the years I had devoted to their happiness. And then came the moment that I will never forget. I watched as they waved goodbye from the airport gate, my phone buzzing with their safe takeoff messages. But something felt off, a subtle distance in their words, a lightness in their tone that didn't match the excitement I had imagined. Then, scrolling through social media later that evening, I froze. There they were, smiling in front of the Lake Tahoe Lodge, glasses raised in celebration. And I wasn't there. I hadn't been included. Every vision of shared laughter, every imagined hug, every moment I had planned in my head evaporated. It hit me like a punch to the chest. After everything I had done, after every sacrifice I had made, I realized they had flown to Lake Tahoe without me. The shock was numbing. My heart raced, a mix of disbelief, hurt, and simmering anger churning inside me. I had given them my hard-earned money, my time, and my energy, believing it would be appreciated, maybe even cherished. Instead, I felt invisible, erased in the very moments I had hoped would bring us closer. I kept asking myself over and over, how could this happen? Did they ever consider how it would feel to be left out after giving everything? Was this just carelessness, or something deeper? The questions twisted in my mind, refusing to let me rest. Trust, love, and family bonds, everything I thought was secure suddenly felt fragile, as if the ground had been pulled out from under me. It was in that moment, watching them laugh in photos without a single thought of me, that I understood the stakes. This wasn't just about money, it was about recognition, about respect, about being seen and valued by the people who had shaped my life. And the realization stung harder than I ever imagined it could. If you've ever sacrificed for family and felt invisible in return, then you know exactly how hollow it can feel to pour everything into someone else's happiness while your own presence is ignored. I won't lie, the pain was sharp, but it also ignited something inside me, a need to process, to respond, and to reclaim the dignity I had assumed would never be questioned. Subscribe now if you've ever sacrificed for family and felt invisible in return. Because what I learned in those first moments of betrayal would change the way I viewed love, sacrifice, and trust forever. I remember the exact moment I decided to make it happen. My parents had always dreamed of visiting Lake Tahoe, a place they mentioned countless times over the years, often with wistful smiles and stories of friends who had gone. Their lives had been full of work, bills, and responsibilities, and I knew they had sacrificed so much for me, for my siblings, and for each other. I wanted to give them something extraordinary, a break from the routine, a memory they could treasure forever. My name is Jordan, and I made the choice to spend $15,500 on plane tickets and accommodations, not because I had money to throw around, but because I wanted to show them my gratitude in a way words never could. I had spent months carefully planning. Every dollar I saved from overtime shifts, side projects, and late-night gigs went toward this goal. I even dipped into my personal savings account, the one I had been building for emergencies, to cover the cost. I weighed every option, calculated every possibility, and made sacrifices I knew would impact my comfort. There were nights I skipped dinner with friends, afternoons I passed on coffee runs I loved, and weekends I spent working instead of relaxing, all to make sure I could give my parents this experience. It was exhausting, but the thought of seeing their faces light up in Tahoe made it worth every second. I imagined the moment we would all be together, walking down the snowy trails, standing on the balcony overlooking the crystal-clear lake, laughter echoing as we shared meals and stories late into the night. I pictured my father pointing out the mountains he had read about for years, my mother snapping photos of every sunset, both of them wrapped in the warmth of a memory I had created. I told myself that this wasn't about recognition, it was about love, about gratitude, about creating a moment that would remind them that their sacrifices mattered. Booking the tickets was both thrilling and nerve-wracking. The credit card statements flashed numbers that made my heart pound, but I convinced myself that the reward would outweigh the cost. I ran through all the logistics repeatedly. The right flights, connecting times, seat selections, luggage allowances, hotel check-ins. I even made small notes about surprises I wanted to include, like a handwritten card for each of them, little treats tucked into their luggage, and plans for a private dinner that would feel like a celebration just for them. Every detail mattered because I wanted everything to be perfect, to reflect the love and effort I had poured into this gift. Despite the excitement, there were moments of doubt. I questioned if it was foolish to spend so much, if I was putting myself in a financial strain I might regret. But every time those thoughts crept in, I pushed them aside and imagined my parents stepping off the plane, eyes wide with joy, arms wrapping around me in gratitude. I told myself that sacrifices like this were part of being a child who truly loved their parents, and that seeing their happiness would make every penny and every sleepless night worth it. I remember telling a close friend about my plan, and they asked if I was sure it was worth it. $15,500 just for a vacation, they said, their tone skeptical. I didn't answer immediately. I thought about the years my parents had worked, the bills they had paid, the dreams they had postponed. This was my way of giving back, my way of saying, without words, that I saw them, that I appreciated every single thing they had done for me. I wasn't doing it for applause. I wasn't doing it for recognition. I was doing it for love. Even as I finalized the plans, I felt the emotional weight of the gift I was giving. This wasn't just a vacation. It was a symbol of everything my parents meant to me, everything I had learned from them, and everything I wanted to express. I wanted them to feel cherished, to feel that their sacrifices had mattered, and that they had someone in their life who would go to extraordinary lengths just to see them happy. I imagined the stories they would tell friends and relatives, the photos they would treasure, the memories we would create together. And yet, beneath the excitement, I felt a subtle unease. A tiny voice in the back of my mind whispered that things might not go as perfectly as I hoped. But I ignored it, reasoning that love required bold action, that giving everything for someone else's happiness sometimes meant taking risks. I believed that the act of generosity itself would be enough, that my parents would understand and appreciate the effort, and that we would share moments that could never be bought. When the tickets were finally booked, I felt a mixture of pride, anxiety, and anticipation. $15,500 was gone from my account, every sacrifice laid bare in numbers and confirmations. But I told myself that love demanded boldness, and that my parents deserved this moment, deserved to feel celebrated in a way that only their child could provide. I imagined us stepping off the plane together, laughing, hugging, and sharing stories, the world shrinking around us for just a week as we focused on family, on connection, and on gratitude. Have you ever spent everything to make someone else's dream come true? That question haunted me as I watched the days tick closer to departure. I convinced myself that this was the right choice, that love required giving everything, and that the reward would be the joy in my parents' eyes. I never expected that the very thing I had worked so hard to provide would leave me feeling invisible, betrayed, and questioning the very foundation of trust one had built with the people I loved most. After I had booked the tickets, the real work began. It was one thing to make the financial commitment, but it was another entirely to coordinate every detail so that the trip would go smoothly. I spent hours comparing flights, making sure the timing worked with my parents' schedules, and finding accommodations that balanced comfort with accessibility. I wanted them to feel pampered without unnecessary stress, to feel as though every part of the trip had been thought out with care. I mapped out the itinerary meticulously. I considered the time it would take to get from the airport to the hotel, what excursions would be most enjoyable, and even the restaurants that offered the kind of food they liked. I called hotels to clarify policies, requested special rooms for their comfort, and made sure transportation was arranged in advance. Every phone call, email, and confirmation felt like another piece of the puzzle falling into place. I imagined my parents stepping into a perfectly orchestrated experience, unaware of the effort it had taken to create. Financially, the strain was significant. $15,500 had already been spent, and I was now budgeting for meals, excursions, and incidental costs. I cut back on small luxuries, skipped social outings, and deferred personal purchases. The evenings I might have spent relaxing or catching up on a favorite show were now consumed by spreadsheets, confirmation numbers, and calls to vendors. It was exhausting, but the thought of sharing this week with my parents kept me going. I wanted them to feel my love in every detail, to know that someone had worked tirelessly to make their dream a reality. Amid all the planning, I found moments of joy. I pictured walking along the snowy paths in Lake Tahoe with my parents, laughter echoing as we shared stories and photographs. I imagined my father pointing out the mountains he had always wanted to see, and my mother smiling as she finally tasted the dishes she had read about for years. These visions carried me through long nights of paperwork and financial juggling. I reminded myself that the effort would be worth it when their faces lit up with happiness. And yet, there were subtle hints that not everything was as I imagined. At first, they were small, easily dismissible. My parents seemed unusually distracted when I mentioned certain excursions. My father made vague comments about work obligations that might overlap with planned activities. My mother laughed at jokes that I didn't quite understand, and once or twice, I noticed glances exchanged between them that carried a weight I could not decipher. I chalked it up to nerves, to excitement, or to the natural chaos of planning a complex trip. I told myself that I was overthinking, that my parents were simply focused on their own anticipation and that everything would work out. Coordinating schedules was another challenge. My parents had commitments that I could not control. I adjusted flights and hotels to accommodate their calendars, rearranged excursions to fit their availability, and even researched local options for any work emergencies that might arise while we were away. Each adjustment required careful calculation, and I found myself working late into the nights to make sure every contingency was covered. I wanted everything to be perfect, not for my own recognition, but for the simple satisfaction of knowing that they would be comfortable and happy. Throughout this process, I noticed small inconsistencies in how my parents responded to my efforts. Sometimes they seemed grateful, thanking me for a carefully selected hotel or a smoothly coordinated flight. At other times, their reactions were minimal, almost indifferent, or they brushed off suggestions as if I had not done anything significant. I tried to tell myself that it was normal, that my efforts were behind the scenes, that they would see the value once the trip began. I wanted to believe that love and generosity were enough to ensure recognition and appreciation. I also began to see how much I had invested emotionally. Every detail I arranged, every dollar I spent, was tied to my hope for shared joy. I imagined moments of laughter in the evenings, walks by the lake, and meals where we could reconnect as a family. These visions motivated me through the tedium of planning and the stress of financial strain. I told myself repeatedly that sacrifices were part of love, that enduring temporary discomfort for someone else's happiness was a choice I gladly made. And yet, even as I focused on the logistics, I could not completely ignore the subtle unease that had begun to creep in. A fleeting hesitation in my father's voice, a distracted smile from my mother, or an offhand comment that hinted at a different expectation, each left a tiny fissure in my certainty. I tried to push it aside, focusing on the bigger picture, the joy that awaited us. I reassured myself that love often required ignoring minor discomforts and that the purpose of the trip was to celebrate, not to dwell on small inconsistencies. I reminded myself constantly why I had undertaken this effort. I was giving my parents the vacation they deserved after years of hard work and sacrifice. I was creating a memory that we would cherish for a lifetime. Every sleepless night spent organizing flights, accommodations, and itineraries was justified by the anticipation of their smiles and the joy I believed awaited us. The small hints of tension were just that, small, insignificant, and easily overshadowed by the bigger purpose. And so I continued, meticulously planning each day, double-checking every detail, and managing both the excitement and the stress. The thought of the shared experiences, the stories we would tell, and the laughter that would fill our days kept me moving forward. I was determined that nothing would go wrong, that every sacrifice would culminate in a week of happiness and connection. Would you notice small red flags if you were blinded by love and generosity? I often ask myself that now, reflecting on the subtle signs I chose to ignore in favor of hope and expectation. Every call, every glance, every understated comment had potential meaning, but I dismissed them all because I believed in the power of love and the certainty that my efforts would be recognized. I thought that the sacrifices I made, both financial and emotional, would naturally result in gratitude and shared joy. I thought I knew my family, and I thought I had done everything right. Little did I know, the moment of anticipation I had built so carefully would soon be shattered in a way I could never have imagined. Even as the trip approached, I began to notice small, almost imperceptible shifts in my parents' behavior. At first, they were so subtle that I questioned whether I was imagining them. My father would mention friends casually in conversation, saying things like, "Oh, it would be fun if Tom joined us for a day or two," or "I think Mary would enjoy seeing the mountains too." My mother made similar remarks, suggesting extra activities or sightseeing options that didn't include me in the planning. Each comment was delivered lightly, almost as a joke, and yet they carried a weight I could not ignore entirely. I tried to brush it off. I told myself they were simply thinking out loud, that maybe they were excited about the trip and didn't realize the implications of their words. I reminded myself that trust was a cornerstone of our relationship, that I had spent months coordinating every detail so that this would be a perfect vacation for all of us. Surely, their words did not mean they would actually consider going without me. My heart wanted to cling to the hope that this was just casual chatter, harmless musings that had no bearing on reality. Yet, as the days passed, the comments became a little more pointed, a little more frequent. My father joked about how easy it would be to sneak away for a private ski day, and my mother laughed, saying, "We might need a few days just for ourselves to relax completely." The words were still delivered with levity, but the laughter felt hollow, as if masking intentions I could not quite define. I felt a flicker of unease deep in my chest, a tiny alarm that whispered, "Pay attention. Don't ignore this feeling." I tried to reconcile my discomfort with the trust one had in them. After all, they were my parents. I had spent years sacrificing for them, supporting them in ways large and small, and I believed that our bond was strong enough to weather any minor miscommunications. I wanted to give them the benefit of the doubt. I reminded myself that this trip was a gift, that I had gone above and beyond to make it possible, and that my love and effort would be enough to ensure we shared the experience together. Even so, the internal conflict grew. On one hand, I wanted to trust their words, to believe in the family promises we had always upheld. On the other hand, I could not completely shake the unease that settled in my stomach when I heard their joking remarks. Each time they laughed about a day apart or extra friends joining, I felt a pang of doubt. I questioned whether I was overreacting, whether my concern was unfounded. I reminded myself that love often required patience and that sometimes laughter and casual comments were simply a way to ease tension or express excitement. The tension inside me manifested in small ways. I found myself double-checking the itinerary, confirming flights and accommodations, as if the act of preparation could guarantee their adherence to our shared plan. I imagined scenarios in my mind, both pleasant and troubling. The three of us exploring Lake Tahoe together, sharing meals and photographs, contrasted with the possibility of arriving at the airport to find they had invited others or made changes without telling me. Each scenario sparked emotions ranging from joy to anxiety, and I realized that I had invested so much that the thought of betrayal was unbearable. One evening, while reviewing the hotel reservations, my mother made another comment that made me pause. She said, "It might be fun if we start a day earlier, just the two of us. You don't mind, right?" I forced a smile and nodded, telling myself that it was harmless, a fleeting whim that would not alter the plan. But the words lingered in my mind long after the conversation ended. The internal tug-of-war intensified. Part of me wanted to ask directly if they were considering going alone, to demand clarity and reassurance. The other part, however, hesitated. I feared confrontation, worried that pressing the issue would seem distrustful or ungrateful, that it might sour the excitement we had built together. I noticed how my emotions fluctuated throughout the week leading up to the trip. I felt excitement, imagining the shared adventures, the breathtaking views, and the laughter that would echo through our days. But interspersed with the excitement was a growing tension, a nagging thought that something could go wrong, that my trust could be misplaced. Every time they mentioned friends or private activities, the flicker of doubt grew, and I struggled to reconcile it with the years of loyalty and love I had invested in them. Despite the unease, I continued with my preparations. I confirmed car rentals, checked flight itineraries, and even prepared a small guide of activities for us to enjoy together. I wanted to control what I could, to ensure that even if there were surprises or minor deviations, the essence of the trip, the moments of connection with my parents, would remain intact. I told myself repeatedly that my dedication and planning would safeguard the experience. That love and effort could overcome minor lapses in judgment or communication. But deep down, I began to understand that my gut was trying to tell me something. The small comments, the laughter masking intentions, the fleeting suggestions of leaving me out, they were not as trivial as I had wanted to believe. My internal conflict grew more pronounced each day. I questioned whether I should confront them directly, demand a commitment to the shared plan, or continue to hope that love would be enough. I weighed the possibility of speaking up against the desire to avoid tension, knowing that family dynamics were delicate and that my role as the one who had made the trip possible added another layer of complexity. Looking back, I realized that these odd conversations were the first clear signs that my trust and expectations might not align with reality. I wanted to believe in my parents, in the bond we had built over years of sacrifice and shared experiences. Yet the subtle hints of deviation, the casual remarks that hinted at exclusion, planted seeds of doubt that I could not easily ignore. I wanted to trust my gut, but I was paralyzed by the hope that it was simply nerves or excitement, that their words were meaningless in the context of our shared love. When do you trust your gut over family promises? I often ask myself that question now, reflecting on the moments when small hints should have been enough to warn me. I was blinded by love and generosity, willing to ignore subtle signs because I believed in the inherent good of my parents and the unspoken understanding that years of effort and sacrifice would ensure the trip remained a shared experience. Little did I know, those small, offhand comments were only the beginning of a chain of events that would leave me questioning everything I thought I knew about trust, family, and loyalty. The week leading up to the trip should have been filled with excitement, but instead, a quiet unease settled over me. Every morning, I checked the flight confirmations, reviewed hotel reservations, and confirmed the itinerary I had painstakingly built. I wanted everything to be perfect. This was not just a vacation. It was the culmination of months of sacrifice, of late nights counting my savings, of making hard choices and setting aside personal comforts so that my parents could finally enjoy a dream I had imagined for them. Despite my meticulous planning, my parents seemed almost casual, almost careless. They thanked me politely, in passing, but I could sense a distance in their tone, a lack of genuine acknowledgement for the enormity of what I had done. It was as if the thousands of dollars, the hours of effort, and the mental energy I had poured into this trip were invisible, tucked away beneath their casual chatter. I kept reminding myself that gratitude does not always come easily, that perhaps they were simply caught up in excitement and overlooked the work behind the scenes. Still, my eyes caught small, subtle hints that something was off. During casual conversations, my father would say things like, "Maybe we could try this place first, just the two of us," or "I'm thinking about inviting a few friends to join us for a day or two." My mother chimed in with a light laugh, adding, "It could be fun to have a little side trip on our own. Don't worry, you'll manage." Each remark, delivered in jest, cut deeper than any overt criticism could. They were implying a deviation from the plan I had so carefully orchestrated. I forced myself to smile, to laugh along, convincing myself that these were innocent ideas, mere suggestions that would never materialize. Every evening, I meticulously packed, checked lists, and reviewed the plans once more. I imagined the moments we would share, strolling along scenic trails, enjoying local cuisine, laughing together in cozy cabins. I pictured my parents taking in every view with awe, unaware of the financial and personal weight I had carried to make this possible. I longed for their smiles, their genuine appreciation, and a shared sense of joy that could justify the sacrifices I had made. Yet, alongside that anticipation was a growing anxiety. I could not shake the feeling that my parents were already drifting away, that the bond one had assumed was unshakable was more fragile than I had imagined. The casual suggestions of separate excursions, the hints at inviting friends, the subtle tone of dismissal in their words, they all fed a quiet tension that simmered beneath my excitement. I asked myself repeatedly whether I should confront them, demand clarity, or trust that love and loyalty would keep our shared plan intact. Packing became a ritual of both preparation and emotional coping. I folded clothes carefully, labeled luggage, and double-checked itineraries, but with every action, I felt the tug of frustration. Months of careful budgeting, skipping personal indulgences, and even working extra hours to cover costs seemed taken for granted. And yet, I told myself that patience was key. Family dynamics were delicate, and confrontation might not be worth the stress before what was supposed to be a joyful trip. I tried to focus on the positive, to remind myself that my parents were people with their own excitement and quirks. Perhaps they simply needed space or were dreaming of small adventures within the larger trip. I wanted to believe in their intentions, to cling to the hope that the trip would remain a shared experience. Each time I saw them laugh about side excursions or private plans, I pushed my doubts aside, convincing myself that humor was harmless and that my love and effort would anchor the trip to our original plan. But even as I rationalized their behavior, my heart sank a little more each day. The dissonance between my expectations and their casual approach was hard to ignore. I noticed the way they spoke about accommodations, often using we in reference to just themselves, or how they would casually suggest bringing friends for certain activities, never asking for my input. I felt invisible in moments that were supposed to be about all of us. It was a subtle erosion of my sense of inclusion, a reminder that sacrifices and intentions could be overlooked, no matter how much I gave. By midweek, my anxiety had grown into a constant hum in the back of my mind. I rehearsed conversations, debated whether to bring up my feelings, and questioned my assumptions. Should I speak now, risk tension and awkwardness, or stay silent and hope that the shared memories and experiences would eventually bridge the distance I felt forming? I vacillated between action and restraint, knowing that both choices carried consequences. I also reflected on the financial weight I had carried alone. $15,500 was not a trivial sum. It had taken months of careful budgeting, sacrifices I had made quietly, and personal debts I had incurred to make this dream a reality. The thought that my parents might disregard the plan, ignore my efforts, or even consider going without me was almost unbearable. I questioned my assumptions about trust, family loyalty, and the expectation that years of sacrifice would be honored in the moment it mattered most. Still, I persisted in preparing. I packed meticulously, organized travel documents, and even set reminders to ensure we all arrived at the airport together, on time, and without confusion. I imagined the smiles, the laughter, and the shared stories that would unfold as we embarked on this journey. I clung to these mental images, hoping they would be enough to outweigh the subtle hints of exclusion, the offhand comments, and the simmering doubt that I carried quietly. Would I speak up now or stay silent to avoid tension? That question haunted every waking moment of the week. My mind replayed scenarios endlessly, weighing confrontation against the hope of maintaining peace. I told myself that restraint was a form of love, that enduring small slights was preferable to conflict, and that the joy of the trip could eclipse the moments of discomfort. Yet, the voice in my gut whispered warnings I could not fully dismiss, a quiet alarm signaling that my trust and expectations might not align with reality. By the night before the flight, I had packed, double-checked, and mentally rehearsed everything I could. The excitement and anxiety were intertwined, a knot of anticipation and unease that refused to untangle. Little did I know, the small hints and casual remarks that I had struggled to interpret were only the beginning of a betrayal that would redefine my understanding of family, trust, and sacrifice. The morning of departure arrived with a mix of excitement and nerves that I could barely contain. I had envisioned this day countless times, the three of us, ready for a shared adventure, stepping onto a plane with luggage neatly packed, tickets in hand, hearts full of anticipation. I woke early, double-checked the documents, confirmed the rides to the airport, and even prepared little snacks for the trip. Every detail mattered because I had poured so much of myself into making this dream a reality. As I moved through the house, checking that nothing was forgotten, I noticed my parents acting unusually casual. My father hummed softly while sipping coffee, and my mother seemed distracted, scrolling on her phone with a faint smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I smiled, thinking maybe they were just excited, maybe nerves were masking their usual gratitude. I reminded myself that this was supposed to be a joyful day, a celebration of all the planning, all the sacrifices I had made. We loaded the car, luggage stacked neatly in the trunk, and I followed them toward the driveway. My heart was a fluttering mix of pride and anticipation. I imagined the conversations, the laughter, the scenic sights we would share. I imagined my parents thanking me, even quietly, for the effort and money I had invested. Every fiber of my being was tuned to this moment, expecting the acknowledgement that I deserved, not for praise, but for the simple justice of being included. Then, as we pulled closer to the airport, a small, seemingly casual statement from my father pierced my chest like a shard of ice. "Actually, we're going to handle the check-in ourselves today," he said, almost absent-mindedly. My brow furrowed, confusion flooding my mind. I glanced at my mother, who offered a faint nod, still absorbed in her phone, as if agreeing to a plan we had never discussed. "Wait," I began, my voice tight with disbelief. "Aren't we all going together?" "The tickets, I arranged everything for all three of us." My words hung in the air, sharp with incredulity. I tried to gauge whether this was a misunderstanding, a momentary slip, but their calm responses only deepened my shock. "Yes," my father said, shrugging lightly. "We figured it would be easier to go alone this time. Don't worry, you can stay and handle things here." His tone was casual, dismissive even, as if what I had done, every last calculation, every sleepless night, every penny spent, was irrelevant. I froze. The knot in my stomach tightened as confusion and betrayal collided. This wasn't supposed to happen. I had spent $15,500, saved for months, made personal sacrifices I had barely acknowledged myself, and now they were leaving without me. My mind raced to find logic, to remind myself that perhaps there was a good reason, a scheduling conflict, a sudden change I hadn't been made aware of. But the subtle smirk on my mother's face, the nonchalance in my father's posture, shattered any possibility of a reasonable explanation. "Go ahead," my mother added lightly, as if to punctuate the moment. "We'll take care of everything. Enjoy your day at home." The words hit me with the weight of a hammer. They were smiling, polite on the surface, yet every ounce of their demeanor screamed indifference to my sacrifice. My voice caught in my throat as anger, disbelief, and hurt swirled into a tight storm within me. I watched them drive away, the car disappearing around the corner, and a hollow silence filled the house. The echo of their absence was deafening. Every small detail I had planned, every ticket purchased, every careful arrangement, every dollar spent, suddenly felt meaningless. I had given my time, my energy, and my money, and in return, I was left standing alone, invisible, and unacknowledged. I sank into a chair, heart hammering, hands trembling slightly. I replayed the morning over and over in my mind. Had I misread the signs? The subtle hints during planning, the casual remarks about just the two of us, the laughter over side excursions, they all made sense now. I had been too trusting, too hopeful, too eager to believe in family bonds that, in that moment, had betrayed me. A wave of conflicting emotions rolled through me. Shock gave way to anger. Confusion melted into hurt. And beneath it all, a quiet, simmering resolve began to form. I realized that being left behind, being ignored, was not just a rejection of my effort. It was a challenge. It was a test of how I would respond to betrayal, to disregard, and to the invisible labor I had carried with pride. I thought back to every choice I had made leading up to this moment. The careful budgeting, the skipped meals, the extra shifts at work, the sleepless nights planning for a family trip I had imagined we would share. Every moment had been intended as a gift, a demonstration of love and care. And now, in a heartbeat, it had been dismissed. Tears pricked my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I had faced disappointment before, yes, but this felt different. This was a culmination of invisible sacrifices, of unacknowledged labor, and now it demanded a response. I would not let this erasure define me. I would not allow my efforts to be negated by the thoughtless actions of those I had given everything for. I called a friend, trying to steady my voice, trying to explain the surreal situation. The disbelief in my own words mirrored the disbelief I felt inside. They left, without me, I said, repeating the words as if saying them aloud would make them less real. But the echo in the quiet room confirmed it. They had gone, and I had been left behind. Sitting there, alone, I began to map out my next steps. This was not just about hurt feelings or financial loss. It was about recognition, respect, and reclaiming the dignity that had been overlooked. I thought about ways to address the situation, to confront the truth, and to ensure that my sacrifices were seen and valued, even if they were dismissed in the moment. I also reflected on my relationship with my parents, realizing that love alone could not protect me from disregard. Sacrifice without acknowledgement, effort without inclusion, was a painful lesson in the complexity of family bonds. I promised myself that I would approach this situation not with passive acceptance but with deliberate intention, using my experience to define boundaries and reclaim my worth. As the hours ticked by, the plane climbed into the sky, taking them farther and farther from me. I sat quietly in the living room, letting the reality sink in. I had given everything, and yet they had chosen to leave me behind. The sting of betrayal was sharp, but beneath it, a quiet resolve began to solidify. If your family left without you after your sacrifices, what would your first reaction be? I can tell you mine: a swirl of shock, hurt, and a determination that the next move would not be one of despair, but of strategy, dignity, and eventual recognition. I knew, in that moment, that the story of this trip would not end with me standing alone. It was only the beginning. I tried to convince myself it was a mistake at first. Maybe my parents had forgotten to include me in a group chat or a last-minute update. Maybe it was some scheduling error. But as the hours passed and my phone buzzed with notifications, a sinking feeling began to take hold. Scrolling through my social media feed, my heart froze. Photos from the very airport I had helped them navigate appeared online. My parents were smiling, their luggage neatly arranged, posing against the backdrop of Lake Tahoe. There I was, still at home, my own plans and expectations left behind. Each image, each caption, felt like a blow. They had taken the trip, my trip, without even a hint of acknowledgement or apology. I stared at the screen, disbelief giving way to anger and hurt. I had spent $15,500, my own savings and a bit of credit I was still paying off, to give them a shared experience, to give us memories together. And now, in a matter of hours, all of that planning, all of that effort, was rendered meaningless. My contributions had been invisible, my sacrifices ignored. Messages began to arrive from friends and family, congratulating them on their getaway. Some asked if I was joining, and I had to bite back the bitterness that rose like fire in my chest. I typed out polite replies, keeping the anger hidden, but inside I was reeling. Every carefully considered detail, every logistical hurdle I had overcome, every penny I had saved, suddenly felt like it had been for nothing. I tried calling my parents, my voice shaking as I asked, "Where are you? I thought we were going together." Each ring went unanswered. I left a voicemail, struggling to keep my tone calm, trying not to let the disbelief seep through. They had chosen to leave without me, to take the trip alone, and now there was no immediate way to reach them. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I dug further. Emails, confirmations, even text messages I had sent to verify their travel plans were now irrelevant. They had bypassed my arrangements, booked excursions, and shared their own itineraries with friends. I could see the images of them skiing, hiking, laughing, moments I had imagined sharing with them, experiences I had painstakingly planned to enjoy together. The reality hit me like a punch to the stomach. My sacrifices had been undervalued, my presence overlooked, and my trust betrayed. The financial aspect of the situation pressed down on me heavily. $15,500 was no small sum. It had been money I had earmarked carefully, money that required sacrifices in my own life, long hours at work, skipped social outings, cutting back on personal expenses. The thought that my efforts had been treated with such disregard made the sting sharper, more acute. I had invested my time, my money, my care, and yet I was invisible in the story they were now telling without me. I replayed every conversation, every moment during the planning stages. The subtle hints they had dropped, the casual mentions of friends joining or separate plans, the half-hearted acknowledgments of my contributions, all of it now formed a pattern I could no longer ignore. I had trusted them completely, believed that family bonds meant shared experiences, that love would translate into recognition. And yet, in a single decision, they had redefined what our relationship meant. Sitting in the quiet of my living room, I felt a flood of conflicting emotions. Hurt, yes, but also a simmering anger, a deep sense of betrayal, and the creeping realization that my trust had been taken for granted. I had wanted to give them a gift, a memory, a shared adventure. Instead, I had been sidelined, my effort minimized, my role in their lives overlooked. I began to consider my response. Should I confront them immediately, demand explanations and apologies, or should I process the betrayal in silence, letting the storm inside me settle before taking action? The instinct to lash out was strong, to let them feel the weight of their decision. But I also knew that confrontation in the heat of the moment could lead to regret, to words spoken in anger that could never be taken back. I reflected on the countless hours spent arranging every detail, imagining their delight, envisioning the shared laughter and joy. Those images, now replaced by the stark reality of their independence from me, forced me to face a painful truth. Love and sacrifice do not always guarantee acknowledgement. Sometimes, even the people closest to us make choices that leave us feeling invisible, unappreciated, and disregarded. I tried to channel my anger into clarity. The first step was acknowledging the betrayal, naming it in my mind so I could confront it consciously. This was not a small oversight or a misunderstanding, it was a deliberate choice to exclude me, to act independently while I had invested so much. Recognizing that allowed me to separate the shock from the strategy, the emotion from the action. I spent the afternoon piecing together a timeline of their actions, saving screenshots, and documenting the confirmations and posts that confirmed the truth. Each image, each message, was a stark reminder of my sacrifice and their disregard. And yet, with every confirmation, the fire of determination within me grew. This was not just about money, or about a missed trip, it was about recognition, respect, and the understanding that my contributions mattered. As evening approached, the images of them enjoying themselves on the mountain slopes, lakeside walks, and scenic tours filled my mind. The initial shock had evolved into a quiet resolve. I could feel the weight of betrayal, but I also realized that my response would define the rest of this story. I could succumb to hurt, allow the moment to diminish my trust and my sense of self, or I could approach it with clarity, patience, and dignity. Would I confront them immediately, demanding they account for their choices, or would I allow myself the space to process in silence, building a measured response? The question hung heavy in the air. I understood now that this was a defining moment, one that would reveal not only their character but my own strength. I sat back, letting the images flicker across my screen, and felt the sting of financial loss and emotional betrayal settle in my chest. But beneath it, a seed of determination had been planted. I would not be invisible. My efforts, my sacrifice, and my care deserved acknowledgement. And even if it was not given willingly, I would find a way to ensure that the truth of my contribution could not be ignored. Processing the discovery was painful, yes, but it was also clarifying. I could see the choices they had made, the casual disregard, and the subtle hints I had once dismissed. Each piece of evidence reinforced the reality of the situation and sharpened my resolve. This was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a reckoning, one that would require strategy, dignity, and the courage to stand for the respect I had earned. I decided I could no longer sit in silence, letting the betrayal simmer in my chest like a slow-burning fire. Every time I looked at the booking confirmations, the messages, the social media posts showing my parents laughing in Lake Tahoe without me, the anger pulsed stronger. I needed answers. I needed to hear it from them directly, even if their words were unlikely to make the hurt disappear. I picked up the phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed. The ringtone seemed unbearably loud in the quiet of my apartment. Each ring echoed my anticipation and dread. When my mother finally answered, her voice was casual, as if nothing was wrong. I could hear the faint background noise of chatter and clinking dishes, a stark reminder that she was far away, enjoying herself without a thought of me. "Mom, I need to talk to you about the trip," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, trying to mask the fury bubbling inside me. "I don't understand why you and Dad went without me. I spent $15,500 to make this happen. We were supposed to go together." There was a pause, and then a sigh, a sound so dismissive it made my chest tighten. "Oh, sweetie, it was just easier this way. We thought it would be nice to have a little freedom, a chance to enjoy it on our own. You've done so much for us already." I froze, my mind reeling. That was it? That was the explanation? I had given everything, sacrificed my own comfort, my own money, and my own plans to make this a shared family memory, and their justification was a casual convenience? My hands tightened around the phone. Easier? Do you realize what I sacrificed to make this trip possible? Do you understand what it meant for me to plan, to save, to coordinate every detail? This was supposed to be a family experience. How could you just leave me out? My voice trembled with a mixture of anger, disbelief, and heartbreak. There was another pause, and I could hear my father in the background. He sounded nonchalant, even mildly amused. "We thought you'd understand. You're always busy, and we didn't want to pressure you. It was a chance to relax." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had imagined countless scenarios in my head, from them expressing regret to them laughing awkwardly and apologizing, but nothing could have prepared me for this level of casual dismissal. The words struck me like a physical blow. Relax? I had spent months tightening my budget, skipping small pleasures, and working extra shifts to ensure they could have this trip. And now it was reduced to their convenience and amusement. Relax? You mean at my expense? At my exclusion? Do you even hear yourself? Do you even understand how deeply hurtful this is? I could feel tears forming, but I refused to let them fall. I had endured disbelief and betrayal silently for too long. This time, I would not hide the fire inside me. My mother tried to interject with a weak attempt at soothing. "We didn't mean to hurt you, honey. It's just that," but I wasn't listening to excuses anymore. Every word, every tone, every dismissive pause had built up into a tidal wave of emotion that I could no longer contain. "I trusted you," I said, my voice breaking slightly but firm. "I believed that family meant something. I believed that the sacrifices I made mattered. And now I see that none of it was enough for you to include me. I gave everything I had, and you treated it as invisible. Do you even care about what I felt when I saw your pictures online? Do you even care that I feel betrayed?" There was silence on the other end, a silence that spoke volumes. Their casual detachment, their inability to see beyond their own enjoyment, left me reeling. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the mix of anger, disbelief, and heartbreak making it hard to breathe. This was more than a trip. This was the culmination of years of sacrifice, trust, and belief in family bonds, all being dismissed in a few short sentences. "I don't even know what to say anymore," my father finally muttered. There was a tone of avoidance, of wanting to end the conversation before it escalated further. But I refused to let it end here. I needed them to understand the magnitude of what they had done, to hear the weight of my disappointment and hurt. "This isn't about the money, Dad. It's about respect, about trust, about the fact that I believed in you and you chose to ignore me. I don't think you understand how deeply this cuts, how personal this feels. You haven't just taken a trip, you've taken the acknowledgement, the gratitude, and the shared experience that I gave everything to create. And you treated it like it meant nothing." Their excuses faltered, replaced by awkward stammering. I could hear them fumbling for words, the casual tone replaced by an uneasy silence. I realized then that the conversation was no longer about the trip. It was about accountability, about showing that my presence and my sacrifices had value, about demanding recognition even if it came through confrontation. "I am hurt beyond words," I continued, my voice quieter now but no less firm. "I am disappointed. I am angry. And I need you to understand that this choice of yours is not acceptable. I deserve more than casual dismissal for the love and care I poured into this trip and into our family." They offered more feeble reassurances, but the words fell flat. There was no acknowledgement of the effort, the financial strain, the emotional investment I had made. Their focus remained on their enjoyment, their convenience, and their detachment from the impact of their choices. I ended the call, my hands shaking. The conversation left me exhausted, emotionally drained, but also more determined than ever. This was not a moment to collapse under hurt. This was a moment to process, to reflect, and to consider the next steps with clarity and strategy. I would not allow their dismissiveness to dictate my self-worth or to erase the effort I had put into making this trip a family experience. The confrontation had been painful, revealing the depth of their disregard, but it had also illuminated the reality I had to face. Their choices were theirs alone, and my response, measured and deliberate, would define the rest of this story. I could feel the anger and heartbreak simmering inside me, but beneath it, a steady resolve began to take shape. I would not be invisible. I would not allow their choices to diminish my value. And even if acknowledgement or apology never came, I would find a way to honor the sacrifices I had made and assert the respect I deserved. After the confrontation, I sat in silence for what felt like hours, staring at the wall and trying to process everything. The financial loss weighed heavily on me, of course. $15,500 was not a trivial sum. It was months of careful saving, budgeting, skipping small luxuries, and stretching every dollar I had. But the emotional weight felt far heavier. The betrayal stung in a way money could never touch. It was the realization that my effort, my love, my investment in this family experience had been dismissed as insignificant. I kept replaying the moments in my mind, like a looping scene from a movie I didn't want to watch but couldn't turn away from. The excitement I had felt when I booked the tickets, the hours I spent coordinating everything, imagining the smiles on my parents' faces as we explored the snowy landscapes together, all of it felt stolen from me. Every detail I had meticulously planned seemed meaningless now because they had chosen to go without me. I questioned myself constantly. Had I misread the signs? Could I have done something differently to ensure they included me? Or was this betrayal beyond my control? I reached for my journal, hoping to untangle the knots of confusion and hurt. Writing had always been my refuge, a place to confront emotions I couldn't voice aloud. I poured everything onto the page, the excitement, the trust, the heartbreak, and the anger. I described every sacrifice I had made, every late night working extra shifts, every dollar saved, and how each of those efforts had been ignored or taken for granted. The act of writing made me feel slightly lighter, as if acknowledging my pain on paper somehow validated it. I also reached out to a close friend, someone who knew my parents and could provide perspective. I explained the entire situation, from the financial preparation to the shock of discovering their trip without me. Talking through it aloud brought both clarity and catharsis. My friend listened patiently, asking questions that helped me see patterns and reaffirming that my feelings were valid. They reminded me that betrayal often says more about the person committing it than the one receiving it. During these long hours of reflection, I realized that this situation was about more than just money or a single trip. It was about boundaries, respect, and self-worth. I had allowed myself to be completely invested in making someone else's happiness my responsibility, often at the expense of my own. Their choice to exclude me revealed the fragile nature of my expectations and highlighted the importance of protecting my emotional well-being. I began to think about boundaries in a new way. In the past, I had gone to great lengths to please, to give, to be seen as a devoted child. I had equated love with sacrifice and validation with compliance. Now, I understood that love could not demand the erasure of my presence. Giving did not mean ignoring my own worth, and care should never be met with exclusion. Each evening, I would take walks to clear my mind, letting the cold air fill my lungs and calm my racing thoughts. I reflected on my own strengths and resilience. I had created this trip out of love, and though it had not turned out as I imagined, I had acted from a place of generosity and integrity. That realization gave me a sense of quiet pride. I understood that while I could not control the actions of others, I could control my response. I could decide whether to let this betrayal define me or to reclaim my power. I also confronted the anger that bubbled within me. It would have been easy to let it fester into bitterness, to dwell on the betrayal and replay it endlessly in my mind. But I knew that holding on to anger without reflection would only hurt me further. Instead, I allowed myself to acknowledge it fully, to feel the sting and the heat, and then to channel it into determination. I would use this experience as a reminder to assert my worth and set clear boundaries for the future. Late at night, when the house was quiet, I would sit with my thoughts and imagine different scenarios. What if I had spoken up earlier? What if I had set firmer limits around my generosity? What if they had chosen differently? Each question brought insight and reinforced the truth that my value was not contingent on their decisions. I could not change the past, but I could shape how I moved forward, how I protected myself, and how I invested in relationships that were reciprocal and respectful. As I processed the loss, I also found moments of gratitude. I realized that I had learned a crucial lesson about family dynamics, self-respect, and emotional independence. I recognized my capacity for love, generosity, and dedication, even in the face of disappointment. This awareness made me stronger, more self-aware, and more confident in my ability to navigate difficult situations. By the end of that week, I felt a shift within me. The shock and heartbreak had not disappeared entirely, but they had been tempered by clarity and resolve. I was no longer just a giver who was taken for granted. I was someone who understood her worth, who could acknowledge her pain without letting it consume her, and who could take deliberate steps to protect her emotional and financial well-being. Would I allow anger to define me forever? No. I chose instead to reclaim my power, to learn from the experience, and to move forward with dignity. The betrayal had been a painful teacher, but I emerged more resilient, more assertive, and more conscious of my value. After days of reflection, I realized that sitting in anger and disappointment would not undo what had happened. I had invested $15,500 in my parents' dream vacation, and they had chosen to go without me. I could not change their decision, but I could control how I responded, how I rebuilt my finances, and how I protected my emotional energy moving forward. Reclaiming control became my focus, a way to assert that my sacrifices did not have to be met with betrayal in order to matter. The first step was financial recovery. I reviewed my accounts, credit balances, and budget with painstaking attention. I knew I had to be strategic to offset the enormous loss I had incurred. I started picking up extra freelance projects, negotiating higher rates for ongoing work, and trimming unnecessary expenses. I felt a sense of purpose in each calculated move. Every dollar I reclaimed, every payment I tracked, and every financial decision I made reminded me that I was not powerless. Money alone could not erase the emotional sting, but regaining control over my resources gave me a tangible sense of agency. Emotionally, I began setting boundaries. I realized that my generosity, while genuine, had often come at the cost of my self-respect. I reflected on my previous pattern of giving everything for family happiness, even when it meant ignoring my own needs. Now, I resolved to ensure that my care and contributions were appreciated, or at least met with acknowledgement and honesty. I set limits on future financial assistance, recognizing that generosity does not guarantee gratitude. I told myself that my love could be unconditional, but my boundaries would be firm. I also began taking time for self-care, something I had neglected for years in the name of providing for my parents. I reconnected with hobbies I had set aside, joined a local fitness class, and started meditating to ease the stress that had accumulated over months of financial and emotional strain. These small acts reinforced my sense of identity beyond being the provider, the planner, and the one who sacrifices endlessly. I was reclaiming pieces of myself that had been overshadowed by obligation. Communicating with my parents became a careful process. I did not want to lash out or burn bridges, but I needed to assert the reality of my feelings. I sent a message that was direct but measured, outlining how their actions had hurt me, explaining the financial impact, and emphasizing that future support would be contingent on honesty and respect. I watched carefully for their response, not to seek apology, but to gauge whether the dynamics could shift in a healthier direction. It became clear that change would not come immediately, and I accepted that. My goal was not to control them but to control my own boundaries and reactions. Reframing the relationship also meant adjusting my expectations. I acknowledged that my parents' actions did not define my worth. I could no longer equate love with compliance, sacrifice with recognition, or giving with unquestioned inclusion. These realizations were sobering, but liberating. They allowed me to see that my generosity was valuable in itself, regardless of external validation. My self-worth was not tied to their appreciation. I reflected on lessons learned. I understand now that financial generosity and emotional investment do not guarantee reciprocal care or consideration. Sometimes, even the people we love most can act in ways that are selfish, dismissive, or hurtful. That knowledge was difficult to accept, but it was necessary. I resolved to be discerning with my energy, to invest in relationships where trust and respect were mutual, and to recognize when it was healthier to step back. Part of reclaiming control was celebrating my resilience. I had faced financial loss, emotional betrayal, and disappointment, yet I was still standing. I could see the strength in planning a family vacation alone and handling the aftermath without spiraling into resentment. I reminded myself that control was not about punishing others but about maintaining my dignity, protecting my resources, and nurturing my own well-being. Each day, I documented my progress. I tracked the financial recovery, noted moments of emotional clarity, and reflected on boundaries that were holding firm. Writing became both therapy and a roadmap, helping me see how far I had come and envision how I wanted to navigate future interactions. It was empowering to witness my own transformation, to see that the same hands that had booked the tickets, calculated costs, and imagined joyful family moments were also capable of rebuilding, protecting, and asserting themselves. In this process, I also found gratitude in unexpected ways. I was grateful for the opportunity to practice discernment, for the chance to redefine my relationships, and for the lessons that only a difficult experience could teach. I realized that control was not about avoiding pain entirely but about learning how to move through it with grace and intentionality. I began envisioning a future where my generosity could exist without self-erasure, where my contributions were recognized or at least met with honesty, and where my emotional health was safeguarded. I imagined family interactions that were honest, balanced, and respectful. And even if such a reality remained uncertain, I knew that I had reclaimed the most important aspect of the situation: control over my own life, decisions, and emotional responses. Would I keep giving if it meant risking betrayal again? I reflected on this question constantly. My answer was nuanced. I would give, but I would do so wisely, intentionally, and without compromising my self-respect. Generosity remained a core part of who I am, but it would now be coupled with discernment and protective boundaries. I would not allow past experiences to dictate my entire approach, but I would allow them to guide me toward healthier decisions. By the end of this journey, I felt a renewed sense of autonomy. The loss of a shared family trip, the betrayal, and the financial strain had been painful, but they had also catalyzed growth. I had learned the value of self-respect, the necessity of boundaries, and the importance of reclaiming control over my life. The experience had reshaped me, not by diminishing my generosity, but by teaching me how to pair it with wisdom, courage, and resilience. Looking back on everything that happened, I can't help but feel the weight of the sacrifices I made. Spending $15,500 to give my parents the trip of their dreams was not just a financial decision. It was an act of love, a tangible expression of gratitude for the people who raised me. I wanted to give them joy, shared memories, and a chance to experience something extraordinary together. Every choice I made, every dollar I set aside, every late-night planning session, it was all meant to honor them. And yet, despite every effort, they left without me. They boarded that plane to Lake Tahoe, smiling in photos that circulated on social media, while I sat at home, staring at my empty living room and feeling invisible. Seeing them laugh and enjoy themselves without a single thought for what I had done cut deeper than any financial loss could. I had given not just money, but time, energy, and emotional labor. I had invested pieces of myself in their happiness, trusting that love would translate into acknowledgement. At first, I questioned myself. Had I misread the situation? Was I being too sensitive? Could I have done something differently to ensure they included me? But deep down, I knew the truth. Generosity is not a guarantee of gratitude. Sometimes, even the people we love most can act selfishly, and that is a reality we must face. The evidence was undeniable. Photos of them on the slopes, messages from friends recounting their stories, all confirming that I had been deliberately excluded. My heart ached with betrayal, but it also taught me a lesson I needed to learn. I realized that boundaries are as vital as generosity. Giving freely is noble, but giving blindly can come at a cost to our dignity. My love and care for my parents did not mean I should erase my own needs or accept being treated as invisible. Protecting my emotional well-being became as important as supporting theirs. I began to see that generosity paired with discernment is not selfish, it is essential. I could give, but I had to ensure my boundaries were clear, my efforts acknowledged, and my self-worth intact. Processing the financial loss was a separate journey. I mapped out budgets, tackled debts, and made conscious decisions to regain stability. Each step, each payment, each dollar reclaimed was a reminder that while I could not control my parents' choices, I could control my own. I learned to separate love from obligation and generosity from exploitation. It was empowering to reclaim that sense of agency, to realize that the story did not end with betrayal, but with my ability to rebuild, protect, and assert myself. Emotionally, I became more cautious but also stronger. I recognized patterns I had overlooked, the subtle comments, the small hints of exclusion, the casual dismissal of my efforts. I understood that ignoring red flags in the name of love can lead to heartbreak. My experience taught me to trust my instincts, to speak up when boundaries are crossed, and to measure my energy for those who respect it. Love is important, but self-respect is irreplaceable. Even in the aftermath, I tried to hold on to gratitude. I was grateful for the clarity this experience brought, for the lessons that forced me to grow, and for the opportunity to redefine my relationship with my parents on terms that honored both love and self-respect. I understood that I could still care for them deeply without allowing my kindness to be taken for granted. I could rebuild my generosity, but now it would come with wisdom and discernment, ensuring that my emotional labor was never undervalued again. The haunting question lingers in my mind. If the people you sacrificed for betray you, would you forgive or never trust again? I wrestled with this, knowing that forgiveness is often a choice, a way to release anger, but it must be weighed against the risk of repeating past patterns. Trust, once fractured, must be rebuilt slowly and deliberately, if at all. And in my case, I realized that protecting my heart and asserting boundaries could coexist with love. They are not mutually exclusive. I also reflected on the importance of self-worth. No amount of sacrifice should diminish it. I had poured my energy into giving my parents a gift from the heart, yet the experience showed me that value is not always measured by how others respond. My generosity remains a part of who I am, but it is now tempered with the knowledge that it must be accompanied by awareness, boundaries, and self-respect. This experience has reshaped how I view family, sacrifice, and love. I am more cautious, more deliberate, but also more confident. I no longer allow myself to be invisible in my own story. I can give freely, but I do so knowing that my dignity is non-negotiable. I can invest emotionally and financially, but I also protect my own heart and future. Ultimately, the lesson is clear. Generosity is noble, but boundaries protect dignity. Love without limits can lead to invisibility. Care without discernment can lead to betrayal. I will continue to give, but now with the wisdom that my worth is not dependent on recognition, and my sacrifices should never come at the cost of my self-respect. Subscribe now for more stories of family, sacrifice, and tough lessons. Share below. Have you ever given everything and felt left behind? How did you reclaim your power and dignity?